Cop laughs in court at black woman's defense, freezes when she shows her USSS badge. Picture a packed courtroom in the heart of Washington, D.C., the air crackling with tension. On one side sits a stoic black woman, her eyes reflecting both determination and a hidden anguish. On the other stands a cocky police officer, eyes glinting with self-assured superiority as he faces her with a sneer. Gossip buzzes through the gallery. Something's off about this case, as though the truth could blow the lid off every preconceived notion in the room. Then, in a single breathtaking moment, she pulls out a badge, an official U.S. Secret Service credential, and the racist cop's mocking grin evaporates in an instant. The pale morning sun crept along Pennsylvania Avenue, illuminating the grand facades of Washington's storied buildings. Cars bustled through rush-hour traffic, weaving around anxious pedestrians and the occasional tourist snapping photos of the majestic structures that house America's democracy. On the corner of 15th Street, not far from the White House, a local police cruiser idled, its lights silently swirling red and blue. Officer Dean Haskins leaned against the hood, sipping lukewarm coffee as he watched people hurry by. Born and raised in a small town in Virginia, Dean had carried a chip on his shoulder ever since he'd moved to the city. He was used to simpler living, unaccustomed to D.C.'s intense pace or its diverse population. Yet it wasn't just the rapid changes of the city that grated on him. It was the sense of power he found behind his badge that fed a darker side. On this particular morning, Dean's cynicism felt unusually heavy. He watched the crowd, scanning each face, suspecting anyone who looked remotely out of place. That was when he noticed her. A tall, poised black woman in a crisp navy suit, stepping quickly along the sidewalk. She seemed calm and confident, gazing ahead with intent focus. But to Dean's trained and jaded eye, her confident stride appeared suspicious. Maybe it was a big city cop's brand of prejudice, or maybe it was the quiet bigotry he carried from his upbringing. But he just couldn't let her walk by without interference. She turned the corner, heading toward a side street near the White House security perimeter. Without a second thought, Dean tossed his coffee cup aside and slid into his cruiser. He followed her at a slow crawl, shadowing her like a predator tracking its prey. The woman glanced over her shoulder, noticing the police cruiser creeping behind her. A flicker of concern crossed her eyes, but she didn't break stride. She simply walked with determined elegance, ignoring the officer's prowling presence. Dean felt the corners of his mouth twitch in satisfaction at her discomfort. He considered it a small reminder of who held the authority on these streets. A moment later, he pulled alongside her and rolled down the passenger window. "Ma'am," he called out, his voice carrying that unmistakable tone of forced politeness. "You mind stepping over here a moment?" She paused, gave him a measured look, then continued walking as though she hadn't heard. Dean's chest tightened. His pride pricked. He slapped the siren for a short burst. "Ma'am, I said step over here," he repeated, his tone losing any veneer of courtesy. Cars behind him honked in frustration at the sudden slowdown, but he paid them no mind. Finally, the woman stopped, exhaled a slow breath, and turned to face the officer. "Is there an issue, officer?" she asked, voice even and composed. Her face revealed no sign of fear or guilt, but a trace of annoyance shimmered in her dark eyes. Dean took a moment to take in her stylish navy suit, the expensive watch on her wrist, the immaculate black pumps on her feet. She didn't look like an ordinary commuter. That alone fueled his suspicion. Someone so polished must be up to something, his mind insisted. "You're walking in a restricted area," Dean lied, stepping out of the cruiser and placing a hand on his holster. "May I see some ID?" "This sidewalk isn't restricted," the woman said calmly. "I walk here every day." A tense standoff formed between them. She offered no sign of deference, no sign that she would yield to his intimidation. For the briefest second, Dean's confidence wavered, but he quickly doubled down, tapping his badge as though it conferred absolute power. "Identification," he said again more forcefully. The woman let out a weary sigh as though she'd encountered this scenario far too many times. She reached into her handbag slowly, ensuring he could see her movements, then pulled out a slim wallet. Dean tensed, half expecting a confrontation, but all she did was withdraw her driver's license. He glanced at the name, Veronica Davenport. The name meant nothing to him. She waited quietly as he stared at the license, frustration flaring when he couldn't find any reason to arrest her. No warrants, no reason to suspect wrongdoing. But Dean felt his indignation rise. She's defiant. She's smug. There has to be something more. "Where were you headed?" he asked, squinting at her. "Work," she answered simply. "Where do you work?" Veronica parted her lips as if to respond, then paused, seeming to reconsider. Instead, she asked, "Is there a problem, officer, or can I leave now?" Dean's anger flared. "I'll decide when you can leave. I have every right to question someone who's close to a high-security area. People are plotting all kinds of things these days." A flicker of annoyance crossed Veronica's face, but she bit back a sharp retort. She'd seen officers like him before, men who wore the badge with a sense of misplaced supremacy. She knew how quickly things could escalate, especially if she didn't tread carefully. So she tried to remain polite, even as her jaw clenched. "Well," she began, "if that's all, officer, I'd like to continue to my destination. I'm late for a meeting." Dean looked her over once more. Something about her just irked him, the nerve of her standing there as though she belonged. Yet he had no legal basis to hold her. He knew that, and he hated it. Finally, he dismissed her with a curt nod. "Fine, move along," he said. But as she turned to leave, he added under his breath, loud enough for her to hear, "You people need to remember your place around here." Veronica paused mid-step, her shoulders stiffening. She clenched her fist inside her pocket but refused to engage. Instead, she continued forward, each step measured and dignified, as if her mere presence challenged his prejudice. Dean huffed, returned to his cruiser, and drove off. Yet something gnawed at him. Maybe it was her unflinching gaze or the sheer nerve she had to stand up to him. He flipped open the small notepad he carried, scribbling down her name. Veronica Davenport. He didn't know why, but he wasn't done with her, not by a long shot. Little did he suspect that he had just set in motion an avalanche of consequences that would come crashing down, not only on Veronica's life, but on his own. He had no way of knowing that in just a few days they'd meet again, in a setting far more formal and with far higher stakes, where everything he thought he knew about her would be shattered in front of the entire courtroom. 3 days later, Veronica sat at her office in the U.S. Department of Homeland Security building, not far from the White House. Officially, she worked as an analyst, a position she'd held for nearly 5 years. Unofficially, she was deeply involved with the U.S. Secret Service, having undergone specialized training. She was far from a rookie, entrusted with sensitive assignments that often put her in close proximity to key national figures. Her discreet presence was crucial. The job demanded a low profile, even within her own department. That morning, she was going through encrypted emails related to a new threat assessment. Every so often, she glanced at the clock, remembering the humiliating brush with Officer Dean Haskins. She'd told herself to let it go, one more instance of casual racism in a long line of them. But something wouldn't let her bury it. The memory of his sneering face, the way he'd called her "you people," still twisted her stomach in anger. A gentle knock broke her concentration. Her colleague, Gabriel Molina, poked his head in. "Hey, Davenport," he said in a low voice, mindful of the need for secrecy in their line of work. "Director Klein wants to see you in his office." Veronica arched an eyebrow. Did he say what about? Nope, but he's got that look in his eye. Something's up. Gabriel offered a knowing shrug. "You better not keep him waiting." She grabbed her notepad and made her way to the director's office, passing through a corridor lined with photos of Secret Service history, agents protecting presidents from Lincoln to Reagan, from Clinton to Obama. Even after years of service, a sense of awe still stirred in her whenever she saw those images. They reminded her of the profound legacy she was part of. Director Samuel Klein was a tall, broad-shouldered man in his early 50s, with a serious demeanor that only softened when he spoke to those he trusted. As Veronica stepped into his office, she immediately sensed tension in the air. Klein's jaw was set, his eyes narrow. He gestured for her to close the door. "Veronica," he said, leaning forward over his desk, "I need you to explain something to me. We received a complaint from the Metropolitan Police Department about an incident involving you near the White House perimeter. Officer Dean Haskins, ring a bell?" Her heart jumped into her throat. "Yes, sir," she said quietly, controlling her emotions. "He stopped me without cause, tried to intimidate me. I provided my ID. He let me go." Klein nodded gravely. "Well, the complaint is that you were uncooperative and that your attitude hindered official police business. The officer claims you were in a restricted zone." Veronica felt her anger flare again. She forced it down, inhaling slowly. "That's not true, sir. There was no restricted zone. It was a public sidewalk. I was simply going to work." Klein exhaled. "I believe you, Davenport, but Haskins is making a big deal out of it. He's demanded a formal hearing about your conduct. Since you're an agent, this quickly becomes a departmental matter. We can't ignore it." "A hearing?" she echoed, stunned. "For what? Walking to the office?" Klein's eyes hardened. "You know how these things go. It's political. It's personal. Whatever it is, the MPD is pushing it. They want to see if you were violating any protocol. They're probably fishing for a scapegoat, or maybe this officer has a grudge. Either way, the hearing's set for next week at the E. Barrett Prettyman Federal Courthouse. We have to attend." Veronica pressed her lips together. A swirl of emotions, rage, humiliation, anxiety, churned inside her. "Understood," she managed. "I'll be there." "Look," Klein said, leaning back with a weary sigh. "I know your record. You're one of our finest. This might be nothing more than a nuisance, but I want to do everything by the book. Show up, answer questions truthfully, and we'll handle it. The last thing we need is for the media to spin some story about a Secret Service agent overstepping boundaries, or about racial profiling in the Capitol. We need to shut this down quickly and cleanly." She swallowed hard, thinking back to the sense of indignity she felt on the sidewalk. Despite her training, despite the knowledge that in her line of work, she had a certain measure of authority, she'd still been treated like a criminal. A part of her seethed at the injustice, but she nodded to Klein. "Yes, sir. I'll do my part." When she left Klein's office, she felt the weight of an impending storm on her shoulders. Never had she imagined her job might place her on the defensive in such a humiliating way. But if Officer Haskins wanted to fight, she was prepared to stand her ground, even if it meant revealing more about her real position than she usually let on. Later that day, Veronica confided in Gabriel. He let out a long whistle as she described the situation. "Sounds like he's trying to make an example out of you," Gabriel said, anger etched in his voice. "Don't they realize you're—" She cut him off with a nod. "Exactly. That's why I'm a bit uneasy. I've always kept a low profile. Now I'll have to step into the spotlight if only to defend myself." Gabriel scoffed. "Well, if he thinks he can win a hearing by lying, he's in for a rude awakening. You have a pristine record, and you have us behind you." Veronica offered a small smile of gratitude. "Thank you, Gabe. I'll need all the support I can get." Privately, though, she dreaded the hearing. She knew the scrutiny she'd face in that stuffy courtroom. And even more, she anticipated the smug grin on Haskins's face when he saw her forced to defend her own innocence. Yet, she also knew something he didn't. She was no ordinary citizen. She was a trained Secret Service agent with a duty to uphold justice. So if he wanted a fight, she'd bring it. Quietly, legally, and with every ounce of dignity she possessed. In the days leading up to the hearing, tension mounted. Rumors circulated around the department. Some asked if it was racially motivated. Others murmured about bureaucratic turf wars between local law enforcement and federal agencies. Veronica tried to maintain her usual calm, staying focused on her daily tasks. Deep down, though, she could feel the fury simmering, alongside a fierce determination to see justice served. The morning of the hearing dawned gray and overcast, the sky threatening rain. As Veronica stood outside the E. Barrett Prettyman Federal Courthouse, she took a moment to steel herself. She'd chosen a simple black pantsuit, professional but conservative, and wore her hair in a neat chignon at the nape of her neck. She glanced up at the imposing columns framing the courthouse entrance. She'd been here before, but always for official business as an analyst or liaison. Today she was on the other side, expected to defend her actions. A crowd was already gathering. Journalists, always on the lookout for a story involving law enforcement controversy, snapped pictures and aimed microphones at anyone who so much as stepped in the direction of the hearing room. A scattering of social justice advocates had assembled too, suspecting this might be another example of racial profiling by a white police officer. They carried signs reading, "Equal Justice," and "Stop Racial Profiling." Veronica felt a pang in her chest. These were her people in a sense, but she couldn't engage with the demonstration. She had to keep her composure, keep her focus on the legal proceedings about to unfold. Inside, the courthouse corridors hummed with muted tension. Veronica navigated through the throng until she found the hearing room. She stepped in, scanning the space. It was a small chamber, more intimate than a typical trial court, but it had the same gravitas. Elevated bench for the judge, wooden seats for attendees, a table for each side. The overhead lights cast a stark glow, and the hush within amplified every shuffle of feet, every rustle of paper. There he was, Officer Dean Haskins. He stood by his attorney, leaning against the table, exuding an air of smug confidence. He wore his uniform neatly pressed, the gold badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. He caught sight of Veronica entering and allowed a smirk to curl his lips. To him, this was a triumph, forcing her into the open, making her defend herself in a situation he'd orchestrated. She spotted her own legal counsel, a departmental lawyer named Elizabeth Chan. They had gone over the details, building a robust case to refute Haskins's claims. Elizabeth was a fierce litigator with a reputation for incisive cross-examination. Seeing her gave Veronica a sense of reassurance. "Miss Davenport," Elizabeth said warmly, gesturing for Veronica to sit beside her. "Everything is set. We'll make this swift." Veronica nodded, her gaze drifting over to see her supervisor, Director Klein, in the back row. He offered a supportive nod, silently communicating that she had the full backing of the agency. Another wave of relief flowed through her. At precisely 9 o'clock, Judge Stephen McPherson entered. Everyone stood. The judge was a man in his late 60s with a reputation for fairness, but also a zero-tolerance approach to any theatrics in his courtroom. He took his seat behind the bench and adjusted his glasses, eyeing the two tables before him. "Let's get to it," he said briskly, tapping the files in front of him. "This is a hearing regarding a complaint filed by Officer Dean Haskins of the Metropolitan Police Department against Agent Veronica Davenport of the U.S. Secret Service. The complaint alleges interference in police business and unauthorized presence in a restricted zone." He glanced up, fixing his gaze on Haskins first. "Officer, I understand you have counsel representing you. Are you both ready to begin?" Haskins' attorney, a wiry man with salt and pepper hair, rose and nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. My client has prepared statements." Judge McPherson turned his attention to Veronica and Elizabeth. "And the defense?" Elizabeth stood. "Yes, Your Honor, we are prepared, and we have significant evidence to demonstrate there was no wrongdoing on the part of Agent Davenport." The judge seemed satisfied. "Then let's proceed." Officer Haskins took the stand first. He recounted his version of events, how he'd seen Veronica walking near a secured zone, how she had refused to comply with his requests, how she became belligerent. At times he embroidered the story with dramatic flair, tossing in phrases like, "I feared for my safety," and "she seemed ready to escalate the situation." He paused frequently, looking at the judge with an air of righteous victimhood. As Veronica listened, she felt her blood boil. The lies were blatant. She'd shown nothing but composure that day, offering her license without hesitation. The tension in the room thickened. Reporters at the back exchanged glances, sensing the discrepancy between Haskins's statements and the actual events they'd heard rumored outside the hearing. Elizabeth rose for cross-examination. Her voice was calm yet sharp. "Officer Haskins, you claim my client was in a restricted zone. Could you clarify exactly which zone this was, and produce official documentation that it was labeled restricted that day?" Haskins visibly tensed. That area near the White House is often subject to shifting designations. We had reason to suspect. "You're suggesting it might have been restricted?" Elizabeth interrupted. "Do you have a signed order, a memo, a barrier indicating it was closed to pedestrian traffic?" Haskins swallowed. "It's common knowledge. Everyone in law enforcement knows those areas can be restricted at any time." Elizabeth's eyes narrowed. "But you have no concrete proof it was restricted that morning, correct?" A muscle twitched in Haskins's jaw. "No official proof, no," he admitted grudgingly. Elizabeth turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I would like to submit into evidence a copy of the official street closures for that date and time, provided by the Metropolitan Police Department and the Secret Service." She handed over papers. "Nowhere does it list Pennsylvania Avenue, nor 15th Street, as restricted on the morning in question." Judge McPherson accepted the documents. He flipped through them, frowning. "Officer, care to respond?" Haskins stammered. "It's possible that I might have made an assumption based on prior closures, but I acted in good faith. The defendant was uncooperative, and I believe she was disregarding my orders." Elizabeth's tone tightened. Was she uncooperative? Or did she simply exercise her right to continue on a public sidewalk? Did she refuse to provide you with identification? He shifted uncomfortably. "She did give me her ID, eventually, but her demeanor was—" "Her demeanor, officer, or your assumptions?" Elizabeth shot back, then turned to the judge, letting the point hang in the air. The judge nodded, seeing the difficulty in Haskins's position. The officer's complaint was already losing traction, but the hearing wasn't over yet. Haskins's attorney tried to salvage the situation. "My client, an experienced police officer, can't be expected to recall every detail of the city's restrictions in the heat of the moment. He was acting to ensure security. The point remains that Miss Davenport hindered his investigation." "Hindered by walking to work?" Elizabeth said, arching a brow. "This is precisely the kind of overreach that leads to false detentions and constitutional violations." A ripple of excitement passed through the gallery. Journalists leaned forward, scribbling in their notepads. This might be more than just a local story. It had the hallmarks of a bigger scandal, especially if it involved allegations of racial profiling. Feeling cornered, Haskins tried a new angle. "Furthermore," he said, "when I asked her questions about why she was there, she was evasive. If she had told me up front who she was, maybe this wouldn't have escalated." Elizabeth turned to Veronica. "Agent Davenport, please come to the stand." As Veronica took the oath and sat in the witness chair, she felt every eye in the room focused on her. She clasped her hands in her lap, remembering her training. Remain calm. Stick to the facts. Don't let emotion take over. Elizabeth guided her through each step of the incident. The sidewalk, the request for ID, the threat implied by Haskins's posture. Veronica's voice was steady, though her heart pounded. She told the court how she had indeed provided her license and how Haskins had no legal reason to detain her. She also mentioned his parting words, "You people need to remember your place." A hush fell in the courtroom. Haskins's attorney shifted uncomfortably. The judge's brow furrowed in concern. Elizabeth pressed on. "Agent Davenport, why didn't you identify yourself as a Secret Service agent at the time?" Veronica took a measured breath. "Because I had no obligation to do so. I was off duty, heading to work, and not under any investigation that warranted me revealing my federal credentials. More importantly, I was not carrying out any official Secret Service action. I complied with Officer Haskins's request for my state-issued ID, which should have been sufficient." Elizabeth nodded, then turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I believe this clarifies Agent Davenport's compliance. Her employer's internal policies do not require her to disclose her full status in an unrelated stop, especially when she has done nothing wrong. At that moment, Officer Haskins let out a scornful laugh from his table, a short, derisive chuckle that reverberated in the quiet courtroom. People turned to him in shock. The judge's glare could have burned a hole through the man. But Haskins pressed on undeterred, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Come on," he sneered. "She's standing here playing innocent, but we all know she's just pulling the race card. Typical. She's trying to blame me for doing my job. If you had just said you worked for the feds, this wouldn't be happening. Instead, you had to make it a racial thing." He didn't get a chance to finish, because in one fluid motion, Veronica reached into her jacket pocket, withdrew a small leather case and flipped it open. There, gleaming under the fluorescent lights, was her official U.S. Secret Service badge. The effect was electric. A startled gasp broke out in the gallery. Cameras flashed. The judge's eyes widened, and Officer Haskins froze in mid-sentence, his entire face draining of color as he realized the enormity of what he'd just said. Everyone in the room stared at the gold shield and the accompanying credentials verifying that Veronica Davenport was indeed a special agent of the United States Secret Service entrusted with the safety and security of the nation's highest officials. The hush that followed was as heavy as a thundercloud. Veronica spoke, her voice clear and resolute. "I am no one's pawn. I'm here because of his false allegations, and I'm tired of being treated as less than, simply because I'm a black woman walking in the wrong place at the wrong time." The tension spiked to an almost unbearable pitch. For a fleeting second, Haskins was speechless, his eyes pinned to the badge. He swallowed hard, as though realizing this was a fight he might lose, and lose spectacularly. Somewhere in the back, a reporter's camera shutter clicked incessantly, capturing every detail. The sweat on Haskins's brow, the stern resolve on Veronica's face, and that iconic badge shining like a testament to truth in the face of injustice. In that moment, the power balance shifted. No longer was Veronica on the defensive. No longer was she just another black citizen forced to justify her existence. She was an agent of the federal government, prepared to uphold the law, even against those who wore the badge but violated its principles. And so began the unraveling of Officer Dean Haskins' carefully constructed lie. The worst was yet to come. For him. The courtroom seemed to vibrate with a collective, suspended breath. Judge McPherson allowed a long moment of silence to let the impact settle. Then, with a gentle clearing of his throat, he motioned for order. "Agent Davenport," he said formally, though with a hint of sympathy softening the edge of his voice. "Please remain on the stand. Counsel, you may continue." Elizabeth nodded and walked toward her client, voice resonating through the still air. "Agent Davenport, the badge you've just shown this court is proof of your employment with the United States Secret Service. Can you confirm for the record how long you've served in that capacity?" Veronica met Elizabeth's gaze. "Yes, I've served as a special agent for 8 years. Prior to that, I was an analyst with the Department of Homeland Security. My clearance level is high enough that I routinely work on threat assessments for presidential events." A murmur of surprise rippled through the courtroom. Even those who'd suspected something more about her background hadn't realized the depth of her experience. Officer Haskins shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Elizabeth pressed on. "Given your training and security clearances, do you often traverse Pennsylvania Avenue in plain clothes?" Veronica nodded. "All the time. It's part of my daily commute, actually. And given that my job frequently takes me to the White House complex, it's a familiar route." Elizabeth turned to the judge, her voice resolute. "Your Honor, it's clear that Agent Davenport had every right to be where she was. Additionally, as a Secret Service agent, she was under no obligation to disclose her federal status during an off-duty stop, particularly when she presented a valid driver's license. Her truthfulness is not in question. Officer Haskins's motivations and subsequent lies, however, are." Judge McPherson directed his gaze at Haskins. "Officer, do you have any response to this new information?" Haskins's attorney stood quickly, attempting to intercept before his client could speak. Your Honor, let me remind the court that the question at hand is whether my client had cause to stop Miss Davenport. His ignorance of her federal employment does not negate the possibility that she was in an area commonly restricted. But the judge was far from convinced. Except we already established there was no restriction in effect that day, he retorted. That means your client's primary justification for the stop, beyond a general suspicion, was invalid. The tension in Haskins's posture was palpable. He glared at Veronica with a mix of anger and humiliation, as though blaming her for revealing the truth he never saw coming. Elizabeth, sensing the advantage, continued, Moreover, Your Honor, the defendant's race appears to have been a significant factor in Officer Haskins's decision to stop her. He specifically made an offensive remark as she left, saying, You people need to remember your place. That's not simply unprofessional. It suggests racial bias. A collective hush again descended, followed by a chorus of sharp whispers. Haskins's face darkened. He looked ready to burst with indignation. But the judge didn't allow the moment to escalate. Instead, he banged his gavel softly for order and addressed Elizabeth. Miss Chan, while I acknowledge the seriousness of these allegations, let's keep the hearing on track. The complaint is that Miss Davenport interfered with police operations. Let's settle that first. Elizabeth inclined her head. Of course, Your Honor. Judge McPherson looked at Veronica. Agent Davenport, did you in any way prevent Officer Haskins from carrying out his duties that morning? Did you refuse to comply with his lawful orders? No, Your Honor, Veronica answered. I provided my ID as requested, answered his questions, and only left when he told me to move along. The judge returned his attention to Haskins. Officer, given everything presented, do you still insist Miss Davenport interfered with your legitimate police duties? Haskins hesitated, teeth clamped. His attorney whispered urgently in his ear. Finally, Haskins sighed through clenched teeth. No, Your Honor, he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. The judge nodded, logging the admission. Then he adjusted his glasses. Well, it appears the complaint is without merit. This hearing should end with the charges dismissed. Relief washed over Veronica. Elizabeth placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, but something in the judge's expression hinted that proceedings weren't entirely over. He turned once more to Elizabeth. Miss Chan, he said, do you or your client have any counters to file regarding the officer's conduct? I ask because the allegations of racial bias are significant, and if Agent Davenport wishes to pursue a complaint, that could be addressed separately. Elizabeth glanced at her client, a silent question in her eyes. Veronica didn't hesitate. She stood from the witness chair, addressing the judge directly. Your Honor, I have no desire to escalate legal tensions unnecessarily. I only want the record to show that I was unjustly stopped and harassed. That said, I trust the Metropolitan Police Department has proper procedures to address this. If they fail to do so, I reserve the right to take further action. Judge McPherson inclined his head. Fair enough. Then I declare the complaint against Agent Davenport dismissed. This hearing is adjourned. He brought down his gavel with a decisive rap. Immediately, the courtroom exploded into murmurs, reporters clamoring for quotes, attorneys hurriedly gathering their papers. Veronica exhaled, feeling both relief and a lingering ache of anger at how close she'd come to being framed. Officer Haskins remained at his table, looking stunned. At the edge of her vision, Veronica saw Director Klein stand and file out quietly, presumably to handle any departmental fallout. Elizabeth guided Veronica toward the exit, but before they could leave, a contingent of reporters converged on them, bombarding them with questions about the day's events. With practiced grace, Elizabeth addressed them, giving a brief statement. Today, the court recognized the baseless nature of the charges against Agent Davenport. We are satisfied with the outcome and will make no further comment. She then led Veronica away, shielding her from further media harassment. Still, Veronica couldn't resist one final glance back at Haskins. He was speaking animatedly with his attorney, his face contorted in fury. She wondered if he'd ever reflect on how his prejudices had led to this humiliating moment, or if he'd simply carry the grudge and blame her for exposing him. As the crowd moved into the corridors, a heavy sense of finality set in. Yet this was only the beginning of the consequences for Officer Haskins. Karma, it seemed, was about to come calling, harder than he ever expected. By the time Officer Dean Haskins returned to the precinct later that afternoon, word of the hearing's outcome had already spread like wildfire. A quiet hush fell over the office as he walked in, uniform still crisp but bearing the invisible stains of defeat. He sensed eyes following him, a mixture of curiosity and disapproval. Officers he'd once casually joked with now avoided making eye contact. He went straight to his desk, shoulders rigid. A half-full coffee cup from the morning sat there, cold and stale. He slammed his palms onto the metal surface, trying to quell the fury roiling inside. It was bad enough that he'd lost, but the spectacle at court, her secret identity, the media coverage, the humiliating smackdown from the judge, left him trembling with resentment. Within minutes, his commanding officer, Lieutenant Marcus Feldman, approached. Feldman was a tall man with a calm, measured demeanor. He looked at Haskins with a mix of disappointment and exasperation. "Dean, in my office," he ordered quietly. Haskins followed, ignoring the sidelong glances. Once inside the cramped office, Feldman closed the door, crossing his arms over his chest. "All right, let's hear it. What the hell happened in court?" Haskins sank into a chair, trying to hide his frustration. "They dismissed the complaint," he muttered. "Turns out she's Secret Service. She whipped out her badge, made me look like a liar." Feldman's brow furrowed. "So you filed a complaint against a federal agent without verifying anything? And from the rumors, you claimed it was a restricted area, which clearly wasn't. Tell me you have some explanation that makes sense." Haskins shifted uncomfortably. "I had reason to suspect suspicious activity. She was—" "Suspicious how?" Feldman interrupted, not buying it. "Because she was a black woman dressed professionally, walking near the White House." Haskins glared up at his superior, bristling. "She was giving me attitude, acting like she was above the law." Feldman exhaled, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Look, Dean, we've worked together for a couple of years. I know you like to push boundaries, but this is a PR nightmare. The city's already dealing with accusations of racial profiling. Now your name is plastered in the headlines. Cop harasses black Secret Service agent. The higher-ups are furious." Haskins's knuckles turned white, gripping the arms of the chair. "What am I supposed to do? Apologize to her publicly?" He spat, the bitterness thick in his voice. Feldman peered at him carefully. "That might be a start, but it's bigger than that now. The department has to investigate your conduct. Internal Affairs is launching a probe." The words hit Haskins like a punch to the gut. Internal Affairs. He knew what that meant. His every action, every file, every past complaint would be scrutinized. The precarious tower of questionable stops and half-truths he'd accumulated over the years could tumble at any moment. "You can't be serious, Lieutenant," he said, his voice laced with desperation. "I did what I thought was right." Feldman shook his head. "Clearly you were wrong, and now the department is paying for it. Effective immediately, you're on administrative leave. Turn in your badge and gun." The finality of that order drained the color from Haskins's face. "Leave?" he echoed. "But I'm a good cop. This is—" "Dean!" Feldman cut him off, his voice tinged with resignation. "Hand them over, now." Heart-pounding, Haskins unlatched his duty belt, letting the holster and gun drop onto Feldman's desk with a dull thud. His badge soon followed, glinting under the fluorescent light. He felt naked without them, robbed of the authority he'd wielded for years. No matter how many times he blinked, the nightmare wouldn't dissolve. Feldman gave him a curt nod. "You'll be notified once the investigation is complete. Until then, go home." Haskins rose unsteadily, stepping out of the office into the main bullpen. Co-workers who'd once respected him kept their distance. Some offered sympathetic looks, but others stared with barely concealed contempt. The rumor mill had already done its job. Most knew the broad strokes of what had transpired in court. For many, it wasn't shocking. Haskins had a reputation for pushing the envelope, for targeting people he found suspicious, particularly if they didn't look like him. With a clenched jaw, he grabbed his personal items and walked out. This time there was no sense of pride in wearing the uniform. The stares felt accusatory, as if every officer in the room was silently telling him, "You brought this on yourself." Outside, a gray drizzle had started to fall. He stood there, water soaking the edges of his hair, feeling unmoored. He knew public sentiment was turning against him. The department had just distanced itself. Even his attorney had said there wasn't much else they could do. That woman, he thought, seething. That woman in the navy suit. He couldn't decide if he was more furious at her for having the audacity to stand up to him, or at himself for not doing his due diligence before filing the complaint. The memory of her calm face, how she'd calmly revealed her badge and shattered his case, haunted him. He considered turning around and heading back inside, maybe to confront someone, to set the record straight. But there was no record to set straight. He'd been caught. The drizzle turned into a cold rain. Shoulders slumped, he trudged away, uncertain of what awaited him. In a small, petty corner of his mind, a plan began to form. If he was going down, maybe he'd find a way to drag her with him. A smear campaign, a rumor, anything to salvage his shattered pride. But as he'd soon discover, that path only led to deeper chaos and more suffering. Karma wasn't done with Dean Haskins, not by a long shot. That evening she tried to decompress at home. She lit a lavender-scented candle, brewed some chamomile tea, and flipped on the TV, hoping to find a mindless show to distract her. But the moment she turned to the local news channel, there it was. Her own face, filling the screen. The anchor discussed the fallout at the Metropolitan Police Department, how Officer Haskins had been placed on administrative leave. They showed cell phone footage from the courthouse steps where a handful of activists chanted, praising Veronica for standing up against prejudice. She sighed and flicked off the TV. I never asked to be anyone's symbol, she thought. I just wanted to do my job in peace. Yet as she sat in the dim glow of her living room lamp, another realization dawned. Maybe her story, unwilling though she was to carry it, could spark a conversation about systemic issues. If at least a few people questioned their biases, maybe some good could come from it. She took a sip of tea, letting the warmth soothe her. Still, in the back of her mind, a nagging sense of anxiety remained. Officer Haskins wasn't the type to roll over quietly. He had shown determination and hatred. She wondered if their paths were truly severed now, or if there was more trouble lurking on the horizon. Officer Dean Haskins sat in the living room of his modest suburban apartment, a half-empty bottle of bourbon on the coffee table. The TV was tuned to a local station replaying the day's headlines about him. He watched with growing contempt, each commentary stoking the embers of his anger. Every day since the hearing, the media coverage had intensified. Public outcry soared. Social media was awash with hashtags condemning police racism. Protesters gathered outside the MPD headquarters, calling for disciplinary action beyond a mere suspension. The possibility of Haskins returning to active duty grew slimmer by the hour. Seething, he guzzled another swig of bourbon. His phone chimed, a text from a buddy on the force. "Hey man, not sure if you heard. IA is digging into your files, they're looking for patterns." "Sorry." Haskins roared in anger, hurling the phone across the room where it clattered on the floor. Patterns, he thought. They're going to brand him a racist. They'd find his old complaints. A few scuffles here and there. Minor allegations that had been swept under the rug thanks to insufficient evidence. This time, with the media spotlight blazing, the department wouldn't risk burying anything. He turned off the TV, only to have his eyes fall on the scuffed wooden box that held old family photos. He opened it, rummaging through pictures from his childhood, memories of a simpler time. A time when he believed that wearing a badge made you a hero, admired and respected by all. Where had it all gone wrong? The memory of Veronica's calm, defiant posture in the courtroom burned in his mind. There was something about the way she'd looked at him, like she saw right through him, like she recognized the bigotry he tried to mask behind an emblem of law and order. His mind churned, weaving fantasies of retribution. He imagined calling in old favors, concocting a story to paint her as corrupt or incompetent. But the rational part of him, though dulled by alcohol, knew it was suicidal. She was a Secret Service agent with an impeccable record. Any false claims would only bury him deeper. So he wallowed in self-pity, cursing the day he ever laid eyes on her. Day by day, the tension mounted. He rarely left his apartment, choosing instead to nurse his anger. Rumors trickled in. IA had discovered more questionable stops, mostly targeting black motorists. His name was whispered in the press, on local talk radio, in online forums. Serial abuser of power, habitual racial profiler, some articles read. Haskins tried to push the blame anywhere else, but all roads led back to him. Despite his isolation, he still had a few supporters, a handful of guys from his old neighborhood, some with their own unspoken prejudices, who told him not to lose hope. They fed him lines like, "The city's gone soft," and "We need tough cops like you." But the words rang hollow when stacked against the evidence piling up against him. Meanwhile, in a quieter corner of Washington, Veronica tried to resume her normal routines, but every step outside her apartment felt fraught with lingering unease. She switched up her commuting route, sometimes driving, other times taking the metro from a different station. She even varied her walking pattern, double-checking over her shoulder every so often. She wasn't paranoid, just realistic about the threats any high-profile figure could face. One evening, as she left the DHS building, she spotted a dark sedan trailing a short distance behind. Alarmed, she took a sudden detour into a crowded shopping district. The sedan drove past, and she saw a vaguely familiar face in the driver's seat before it sped away. Her heart pounded. Had that been one of Haskins's friends, or was it merely a coincidence? She decided to share her concerns with Gabriel Molina. Over a late-night coffee in the break room, she recounted the eerie feeling that someone might be watching her. Gabriel frowned, stirring his coffee. "Veronica, you're not just a typical agent now. You're a headline. I wouldn't be surprised if tabloid reporters or paparazzi are trying to get candid shots." She nodded grimly. "That's what I'm hoping it is. But my gut says otherwise." He squeezed her shoulder gently. "Maybe you should stay with someone for a while. A friend, family, just until this blows over." She offered a small smile. "I'll think about it, but I'm armed, and I have training. I'll be okay." Underneath her calm facade, though, her nerves were taut. The tension of not knowing who might be lurking out there gnawed at her. She took the matter up with her superiors, who assigned a discreet protective detail to keep an eye on her for a few days, just in case. Nothing surfaced immediately, but she remained vigilant. It was late one evening when Veronica found herself working overtime on a classified briefing that needed finishing by dawn. The DHS building was nearly deserted, save for a few security personnel and a handful of agents working late shifts. Outside, a chilly autumn wind whistled through the silent streets. Shortly after midnight, she decided to grab some fresh air. She slipped her ID badge around her neck and took the elevator down to the lobby. The security guard on duty, a friendly older man named Rich, greeted her with a nod. She pushed through the rotating glass doors and stepped into the crisp night. The glare of streetlights illuminated a stretch of pavement leading to the main road. She stood there a moment, inhaling deeply, letting the cold air clear her mind. "Just a few more hours," she told herself, "and I can finally head home and sleep." A sudden movement caught her eye. Her gaze snapped to a dark figure stepping out from behind a parked van. The figure wore a hooded jacket, but even in the dim light she recognized the face. Dean Haskins. Her pulse spiked. He must be out of his mind to approach a federal building like this. Adrenaline flooded her veins. She reached for her phone, intending to call security. But Haskins took a few quick steps forward, a gun glinting in his hand. "Don't you dare," he rasped, voice laced with desperation and rage. "No calls." Veronica's heart hammered. She raised both hands slowly, trying to remain calm. "Put the gun down, Haskins. There are cameras everywhere. You won't get out of this." His face was drawn, eyes bloodshot. He looked thinner, more unhinged than she remembered. "I lost everything because of you," he spat. "My badge, my career, my reputation. And you walk around a damn hero." He brandished the weapon, a cheap-looking pistol that shook in his trembling grip. Veronica maintained steady eye contact, her training kicking in. The first rule: keep him talking. "You lost everything because of your own actions," she said softly but firmly. "I never asked for any of this. The court hearing, the media, it just happened." "Bull," he growled. "You could have let it go. You could have just told me who you were." She pressed her lips together, a surge of anger cutting through her fear. "You harassed me for no reason. You lied in court. You made this happen, Haskins." His eyes shone with malice, yet also flickered with regret. The whiff of alcohol wafted off him. "I never wanted to shoot you," he mumbled. "But my life's over anyway." The words sent a chill down her spine. For a split second, she recalled all her close-quarters defense training. She tried to discreetly shift her footing, get ready to disarm him if he took a shot. The question was, did he really intend to kill her, or was he bluffing? In the distance, she heard the faint hum of an approaching car. At the same time, the building doors slid open behind her, and Rich, the security guard, stepped out. He spotted the gun instantly, eyes widening. "Hey, put it down!" Rich shouted, radio crackling in his other hand. Haskins whipped around at the sound, momentarily distracted. Veronica saw her chance. She lunged, knocking the gun to the side just as he fired. The shot rang out, echoing in the deserted street. Sparks flew as the bullet ricocheted off a street lamp. They grappled, bodies colliding in a frenzied struggle. Though he was taller and heavier, Veronica's training gave her an edge. She twisted his wrist, forcing the gun from his hand. It clattered to the ground. Another twist, and Haskins cried out in pain, dropping to his knees. By the time security reinforcements arrived, Veronica had him pinned, her own sidearm drawn. She'd managed to retrieve it from the holster at her waist. She pointed it firmly at him as two armed guards secured Haskins. Breathing heavily, she felt a rush of relief, fear, and outrage all at once. Rich ran up, panting, scanning her for injuries. "You okay, Agent Davenport?" She nodded shakily. "Fine. Just get him inside. Call MPD." Haskins groaned, sweat pouring down his face. "You bitch," he hissed. "This is your fault." She ignored his words, adrenaline still surging. Security guards yanked him to his feet and dragged him toward the building's entrance. Blue and red lights soon painted the street as police cruisers converged. In the swirl of confusion, she gave her statement. Haskins was arrested, cuffed, and stuffed into a squad car. She watched from the sidelines, arms wrapped around her middle, trying to process the fact that she'd almost been shot. The days following Haskins' arrest brought a strange mix of relief and exhaustion for Veronica. She spent hours cooperating with the investigation, detailing every aspect of the assault. Surveillance footage from the DHS building's exterior cameras left no doubt about Haskins' intentions. The evidence against him was ironclad. Facing charges of attempted assault with a deadly weapon on a federal agent, plus a host of other charges stemming from his prior misconduct, Haskins' fate was sealed. The media covered the story, though this time the tone was definitive. Disgraced officer attempts attack on Secret Service agent. Public sympathy was firmly with Veronica, praising her quick thinking and composure. The MPD swiftly terminated Haskins, citing multiple violations and the felony charges he now faced. Official statements condemned his actions, distancing the department from his behavior. Internal Affairs concluded its investigation, releasing a damning report that uncovered a pattern of racial bias in his stops and arrests. He would never wear a badge again. Through it all, Veronica tried to regain some sense of normalcy. She continued her work, analyzing threats, attending meetings, safeguarding national figures. In rare, quiet moments, she reflected on how close she'd come to losing her life. The incident reminded her of the harsh reality that even those sworn to protect could become the threat when driven by hatred. One sunny afternoon, Director Klein asked her to meet him in his office. She arrived to find him standing by the window, hands clasped behind his back. He turned, a small smile on his face. "Agent Davenport," he said warmly, "I've just finished speaking with the deputy director. We want to commend you for your professional handling of this entire ordeal. From the initial complaint to the final confrontation, you conducted yourself with dignity." She cleared her throat, feeling a swell of emotion. "Thank you, sir. I was just doing what any agent would." He nodded. "Perhaps, but not every agent would have your composure. We'd like to offer you a promotion. Assistant Special Agent in charge of a new initiative we're rolling out focused on interagency cooperation. We need someone with a proven track record of integrity and resilience." Her eyes widened. The promotion was a big deal, a step up that would place her in a leadership position, bridging the gap between Secret Service and other law enforcement bodies. The irony struck her. This all stemmed from a moment of profound conflict with a local cop. Yet here she was, being entrusted with fostering cooperation. "I'm honored," she said softly, "and I accept." Klein extended his hand and she shook it firmly. "Congratulations, ASAC Davenport. I have a feeling you'll excel. Now get out of here and enjoy the sunshine for once." She laughed, a lightness filling her chest that she hadn't felt in weeks. Stepping out of the office, she felt the beginnings of a fresh chapter in her life. Yes, the ordeal had been harrowing, but it had also shed a blinding light on injustice, and in shining that light, both her personal path and the broader system had a chance to grow more transparent, more accountable. Thank you for joining us on this powerful journey of justice and resilience. Veronica's story proves that standing up against prejudice, even when the odds seem stacked, can reshape destinies. A simple court hearing revealed hidden truths, leading to the swift downfall of a racist cop who thought his power was absolute. Yet in the aftermath of conflict and betrayal, Veronica found not only vindication, but a stronger sense of purpose. If this tale moved you, please show your support. Hit the like button to let us know you stand against injustice. Drop a comment to share your thoughts about this epic courtroom showdown. And if you believe more people should hear such stories, hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to tap the notification bell so you never miss an inspiring tale of truth and triumph. Thank you for watching, and remember, justice always has the last word.